Hello everyone. My name is Sarah Avery, and I am the Executive Director of Quanta Change. And today I am just so excited to be sharing some of my own Quanta Change story. That's because the monumental changes that I have experienced through Quanta Change are what make me so passionate about wanting to share that with others and help others feel those same sorts of positive changes through the Quanta Change process. So you may hear what I'm saying today and really resonate with it. You might even think we're like twins separated at birth. And if so, I just really hope that today gives you some hope that if you're really struggling with some of these same things that I was, that you feel that change really is possible, because it is. And you may hear what I'm talking about today, and it might sound really foreign to you. And if that's the case, you and I probably have quite different patterns of learned distress. And so you might hear what I say today, though, and think of someone you know, someone close to you, perhaps. And hopefully this will help give you some more understanding of behavior of theirs that may have been baffling to you to this point. So I hope it helps in that way. So my pattern of learned distress is called the caregiver pattern. And it's one of 6 patterns. You can find out which pattern you are by going to my website and clicking on the free report button. And I'll mention that at the end also. So the first thing that I want to talk about today is when I first came to Quanta Change, this is something I really hoped it would help with, which was really deep-seated anxiety around getting other people's approval. So here's some of what that felt like for me. I would lose sleep, sometimes multiple nights of sleep, worrying about some little thing that I had said or done and how people were feeling about me as a result of that. Sometimes I felt like I needed to clarify or explain myself, so I would send an email or sometimes multiple emails trying to explain myself so they would understand where I was coming from and hopefully still like me. I also spent tons of energy on trying to just be what other people wanted me to be. I think of myself now in that time as being a chameleon. I wasn't really being myself. I was just trying to be what they wanted. And it was exhausting. So I wonder if this sounds familiar to you, or does it sound like someone you know? Well, Quanta Change really helped me so much with this. So let me explain some of how that felt. So first of all, who I am today, I really know who I am, and I really like who I am. Instead of feeling a little sick, really, if I feel like somebody doesn't like me, I sort of shrug my shoulders and go, well, I'm not for everyone. And that's not something that I have to work at. It's not something I have to convince myself of. It's also not defiant. It's just how I feel now. So how I feel about myself comes first, and it's where I live from, instead of being constantly focused on how other people were feeling about me and seeing me. So does this sound familiar, or does it sound impossible when I'm talking about this kind of change? So if it does, it would have sounded totally impossible to me all those years ago. So I really hear you and your frustration with this. So another way this has changed for me is that I don't lose sleep. Say if I don't hear back from someone, I don't lose sleep over that. I don't worry endlessly over it. And if I do feel like I need to go back and apologize for something I said that might have been insensitive or wrong, or clarify something I said, it's quick and simple, and I'm kind of done. I don't wait on pins and needles for a response, and I don't obsess about what else I could have said to make myself more clear. Really how I feel about myself and how I want to express myself in the world is where I'm coming from. It's what drives me now. And so is this sounding familiar to you? Are you exhausted by this particular issue? Because what I want you to know is that the change for me in this realm has brought about a life that is so much easier and more enjoyable. In fact, I actually enjoy other people now, rather than what I realized I was feeling then was just being sort of terrified of the point at which they were going to start to disapprove of me. So I hope that gives you some hope. And if you're not like me at all, and this sounds really strange to you, are you picturing someone you know who you think, oh, I wonder if that's how they feel? Are certain words coming to mind, like needy or maybe clingy or codependent? Yeah, that is the behavior that caregivers tend to exhibit. And that is because the caregiver pattern of learned distress is built on this really deep feeling that we just can't do it ourselves, that we don't know how, that we need a lot of help and guidance and someone to tell us how sometimes or what to do. And so we're really dependent, and using that word consciously, we're dependent on needing other people's approval, other people's help. And you know, that's just all built on that learned distress feeling of not being able to do it ourselves. So I hope that that gives you some understanding of maybe some folks you know. So the next thing I wanted to talk about today is one of the things that Quanta Change helped with really early on, which was a long-standing health issue that I had been trying every which way to solve. And that was adrenal fatigue and overall endocrine suppression. And, you know, I'll stop here and say that Quanta Change is not a substitute for medical care in any way, but I have seen very often that Quanta Change and medical care of some sort can really work together or alongside each other quite well to bring about better results. So in terms of endocrine suppression for me, I had tried all of the allopathic routes, all of the holistic routes, and I was down to one last resort, which was blocking and replacing all my hormones, basically going on hormonal life support at the age of 29 years old. And not only did that sound a bit scary to me, but I was also really reluctant to do it because I had seen this phenomenon. As I had been trying to treat things, I would treat one hormone level and it would come up, but then another hormone over here would drop precipitously and I would feel even worse than I did before. And so it seemed like there was some force, something deeper than the level of my physiology that was really just trying to keep me down or keep dragging me down. And it was really a little scared what would happen if I shut off the hormone route to that. I was scared to find out what that force would do. So I'm curious if this sounds familiar to you, either in the realm of your health or maybe some other part of your life, that there's some issue that you just haven't been able to get to the bottom of. So Quanta Change really can be very helpful with that. So as I started to dig into this issue for myself, there were a couple things I was learning from the Quanta Change founder, who was my guide. I was learning that it's how we feel about being ourselves that is really driving every single thing that's going on in our lives, including our physical health. And from doctors, I was learning that a fully functioning endocrine system is what enables us to be fully functional adults or fully functional people, fully functional and expressive people. And so I thought, well, wait a second. So if my sense of self, how I feel about being myself, is driving everything, why would it bring about the shutdown of this really essential system in my body? Why would it be safer or better for me from the standpoint of my sense of self to not be able to fully function or fully express myself? Well, immediately, once I got that question, two things really sprang to mind. The first was that one of my models for being an adult human was my dad, of course, and he was diagnosed with kidney failure the same week my mother found out she was pregnant with me. and he gradually got sicker over my young life, and he died when I was 3.5 years old. From that, I absorbed the feeling that the way it is to be an adult human being is to get sick and die young. The other reason that I realized about this issue for me was, well, not surprisingly, my mom. My mom, through undiagnosed mental challenges, emotional challenges through most of her life, she was somebody who it just wasn't safe to be too anything around. It wasn't safe to be too happy, too sad, certainly not angry, too loud, too soft, too anything. And, so what I needed to be was somebody who didn't really have a lot of feelings. I needed to shut my feelings down around my mom in order to feel safe and to be able to interact in a safe and healthy way with her. And so, I was extremely young, and there's no rational way to figure that out. So my body did it for me. My sense of self shut down my endocrine system enough for me to kind of keep my feelings in check and stay, safe emotionally around my mom. So as I started to unlearn the underlying learned distress under this, I had a remarkable shift in my health. Symptoms I had of adrenal fatigue going back to early elementary school went away. They've never come back in more than 20 years. And the overall markers of health that I was using to just gauge how I was doing showed that I was doing better than I had been in many years. So if this sounds familiar, is there something going on for you that just seems mysterious? You can't figure out what the source of it is, what the reason for it is. It could be in your health. It could be some other part of your life. So what I found is that Quanta Change, when we can get to the source learned distress of an issue and start to unlearn it, one of two things happens. One, you may get some kind of relief in a certain way from that right away, or you may find that a pathway forward opens up. So if it's in a medical issue, a treatment pathway forward, or it might be some other part of your life where it just finally all of a sudden opens up to you to move forward for the first time in a long time. So hope that sounds helpful to you. And the last thing I want to touch on today is an issue. I wonder if you can relate to this. I never felt good enough. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I just never felt like I could be perfect enough to be okay. Even when I succeeded really well, say I got high grades, or in my first career and my training leading up to my first career as a violinist, when I'd have some big achievement, some big success, I really wouldn't rest in that for any time at all. What I would do is reset the floor of what was acceptable at that level. And then everything I did past that had to be striving for more and more perfection beyond that point. It was exhausting. So some examples of that, I would be in the practice rooms in my undergrad and grad school, in the practice rooms earlier than everybody and later than everybody in the day. Sometimes, I would have a great big concert, and believe it or not, after that concert, when everybody else went out to celebrate, I would go to the practice rooms and keep practicing. I kind of cringe to think about that. I'm sad for myself thinking about that. And I even remember going into my master's degree recital. I remember kind of yelling at some friends who were saying, "Oh, yay, Sarah, I'm glad your recital's coming." And I was just distraught about it. And I said, they should really fail me because I just clearly can't play a single note in tune. Now, that wasn't true. And I was actually achieved a lot in my violin career, even to that point. But it felt that way to me. It really felt like I was completely failing, even though everyone around me who I trusted was telling me the opposite. And I felt this pressure really in every part of my life. I kind of felt this underlying nagging feeling all the time, that this sort of regret that I just hadn't done things perfectly enough. And on top of that, this awful worry that I was just never going to be able to do anything perfectly enough in the future. And it was just all gnawing on me at all times. So does this sound familiar? If so, are you exhausted? Because it's exhausting, right? Yeah. So I can use how it felt to unlearn layers of this learned distress to really describe how quanta change feels as you're going through it. Sometimes I liken it to turning down the volume on a radio. And on the radio dial, the perfectionism radio dial of 1 to 10, I was at least a 14, maybe higher, as you can hear. So as I started to unlearn these things, the underlying learned distress behind my perfectionism, there were 3 big things that I noticed. One is that underlying nagging feeling that I had all the time of past regret about past imperfection and worry about future imperfection, I got periods of relief from that. I had times where it felt like it was gone, or it was so much less intense that it was like it wasn't even there. And along with that, even when it was triggered, at what felt like the highest possible level, I could actually look back in time and think, well, no, wait a second. I remember what a 14 felt like. This is not a 14. This is like maybe 11, or maybe as I went along an 8. And that level of trigger just kept coming down and coming down. So that was amazing. Another thing I noticed was that I started to really feel that my efforts were good enough. Not good enough in the like, well, that's good enough, I'm going to sleep, but really truly good enough. And that wasn't something that I had to convince myself of. It wasn't something that I had to have some kind of practice around. It wasn't, it wasn't something that I had to push away the negative feeling. I just really felt that way. And it's also not that my standards lowered. And in fact, the same people around me who I trusted to give me feedback were saying, Sarah, as a violinist, say, you sound better than ever. You sound great. It was so amazing. And I think that actually what happens is once we get rid of underlying learned distress, it frees us up. It frees up our well-being to bring about more and more of our lives. And so we actually can perform better or do things better than we have before, because there's not all that underlying pressure, and we're coming from well-being. And the other thing I'll say here is that I started to realize that not only were my efforts good enough, but they were my unique contribution. They were my uniqueness expressed in the world, and that felt really good. And I started to also recognize that other people were bringing their uniqueness to the table, or to the symphony orchestra, or to the quartet. And I realized that it was sort of like we were weaving together some kind of beautiful tapestry out of each of our unique threads that we were bringing. And I can't tell you how much more enjoyable this is than that weird kind of competition I always felt like I was in, to just hit the perfection bar maybe a little higher than everybody else, or everybody was trying to do the same thing in the same way. It's just so much better and more enjoyable. So I'll just close out my examples by just saying that living from well-being and learned distress instead of learned distress is just so much easier and more enjoyable. So if this really resonated, and if any of these examples resonated with you, I hope that you are just seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, feeling some optimism that things can really change if you've really felt like you've been struggling with these things. And if you didn't hear anything today that is what you're struggling with, there are a couple things I want you to know. One is that I work with people of all of the 6 SQ patterns, the learned distress patterns, So I've seen these kinds of changes in people from all of the different patterns of learned distress. And the other thing I want you to know is that what I bring to my work in helping other people go through this process is my lived experience of truly struggling and truly being miserable. And then seeing so much positive change happen that it's actually difficult for me to recall how bad I used to feel, how much struggle I was in these ways that I've been describing to you today. I kind of had to dig in and recall back to that time. It's not, that feeling memory isn't just sitting there for me anymore of how it felt. So, what I want to say is it's really my joy to help other people have this same experience of that kind of change. So, are you wondering what it would be like to experience this change for yourself? Well, the first step in doing that is to find out which pattern of learned distress you have, which one of the 6 patterns. So in addition to my pattern caregiver, they are the idealist, the perfectionist, optimist, defeatist, and dictator or benevolent dictator. And the reason for finding out your pattern of learned distress is not to be immersed in it anymore or study it, but it is so that you can unlearn that learned distress, to uncover your unique well-being that is the core of who you are, so that you can live from that, so that you can enjoy and experience and express that in the world. So the way that you get your pattern of learned distress is you're going to take a free, in-depth, scientifically validated personality test on my website. And when you do that, I am going to graph your answers and send you a free report with your pattern or patterns. Sometimes you're a combination of learned distress, how you've been surviving with that pattern, and how Quanta Change really might help you feel so much better in these same kinds of ways that I have been describing today. So I hope that you'll go to my website and take the test. The way you do that is, my website is Quanta Change, Quanta change.com. And you click on the free report button, and I will put that link in my bio and comments everywhere, all the usual places. So thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you so much for listening to some of my story. I really hope that it's given you some hope, and I will really look forward to joining you next Friday to explain some more about Quanta Change, how Quanta Change can really help you feel good being you. Thank you so much.